All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to go?
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, so today we're diving into a case. And you guys, this one is wild.
It is a doozy.
It really is. So this one was filed in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. And it's one of those that I saw the name and I was like, oh, we have to talk about this.
Yeah, how can you not?
You can't. You just can't. So the case name is Richard v. Combs.
Woo.
Yeah, and I know what you're thinking already.
I am.
Sean Combs is a named defendant.
As in P. Diddy?
Yes, as in Puff Daddy P. Diddy.
Wow, okay.
So, I mean, that alone, we're already off to a great start, right? But wait, it gets better.
Okay, I'm listening.
So there's not just one defendant. There are over 30 defendants.
30.
Over 30. It's insane. So we're talking individuals, production companies, record labels, and even a beverage company.
A beverage company, what?
Yes, a beverage company.
Okay, this is getting interesting.
All right. It's a lot to untangle.
It-
So let's take a step back for a second and just kind of, start from the beginning.
Okay.
So our plaintiff is Dawn Angelique Richard. And now at this point, we don't know all the details of her claims. The court documents that we have are a little vague on that so far.
Okay, so some mystery there.
Yeah, a little bit of a mystery. But what we do know is that multiple defendants are already trying to get this case dismissed, like right out of the gate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we're talking UMGR Remote Productions, Inc., New Remote Productions, Inc., and Harve Pierre.
So they're saying, like, see y'all later, don't want to be a part of this.
Exactly. They want out. And they've actually filed what are called pre-motion letters.
Pre-motion letters. Now, I've heard that term before. Can you remind me what exactly is a pre-motion letter?
Yeah. So basically, it's a letter that's sent to the court before a formal motion is filed.
Okay.
And it basically outlines the arguments that the party is going to make in their motion. So in this case, these defendants are saying, hey, we think this case should be dismissed, and here's why.
Got it. So it's kind of like a heads up to the court and the other side.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
So these pre-motion letters have been filed, and the plaintiff has responded to them. And now we're waiting for responses from some of the other defendants.
Huh?
Now, Sean Combs, he's actually requested an extension for his response.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's got a little more time.
Okay.
But here's where it gets even more interesting.
More interesting. I didn't think that was possible.
I know, right? Well, the judge has decided to adjourn the pre-motion conferences until all of the defendants have responded to the complaint.
Okay, why is that?
Well, the judge is actually anticipating that the plaintiff might file an amended complaint.
So the plaintiff might change or add to their claims.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So the judge is saying, hold on, let's wait and see what the full picture is before we start making any decisions.
Exactly. And to be honest, that makes a lot of sense because with so many defendants and the possibility of these claims changing, it's really the most efficient way to handle it.
I can see that.
Yeah, and so the judge has adjourned these pre-motion conferences, what's called sine die.
Sine die. What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a fancy legal term, but basically it just means indefinitely.
So not necessarily canceled, just postponed.
Right, exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to get a sense of this now. So
Yeah.
to recap, we have this lawsuit by Dawn Angelique Richard against a whole bunch of defendants, including Sean Combs. We don't know the exact details of the lawsuit yet, but we know that some of the defendants are trying to get out of it early, and the judge has decided to hit pause on everything until everyone has responded to the complaint.
Exactly. That's a perfect summary.
This is going to be good.
I know, right? We're just getting started.
Can't wait to see what happens next.
Me too.
It is a mystery, right? A legal thriller.
Yeah, total cliffhanger. So we've got record labels, we got production companies, we got Sean Combs himself. I mean, what could this lawsuit be about?
Well, like you said, we don't know the specifics yet, but we can kind of look at who's involved and make some educated guesses.
Okay, so let's speculate a little bit. What are some of the things that tend to cause legal drama in the music industry?
Oh, there's so many possibilities, but I'd say one of the most common is disputes over money, especially royalties. You know?
Royalties, yeah.
Yeah, those splits can get really messy.
Yeah, so you're saying Dawn Richard could be claiming that she's not getting her fair share of the profits from her music.
Exactly, and with so many defendants involved, it could be that her music was used in a lot of different ways, you know, like in TV shows or commercials or maybe even sampled by other artists. And she's alleging that she wasn't properly compensated for any of that.
Okay, that makes sense. And I mean, we know that the music industry is notorious for contracts that are really complicated and sometimes even unfair to artists.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. These artists They're often young when they sign these deals.
Yeah.
And they might not fully understand all the legal jargon.
Yeah, and they're just so excited to get their music out there that they might sign anything.
Exactly, and that can come back to bite them later on.
Big time.
Yeah, so it's possible that Dawn Richard is challenging the terms of one of her contracts. Maybe she's saying that it was invalid or that it was breached.
Okay, so we got royalties, we got contracts. What else could be going on here?
Well, another big issue in the music industry is intellectual property rights. Copyrights, trademarks, that sort of thing.
Right, so who owns the rights to the music, who can use it, who profits from it?
Exactly, and that can get really complicated, especially when you have multiple parties involved, like in this case.
Yeah, so maybe Dawn Richard is claiming that someone is infringing on her copyrights or that she's not getting the credit she deserves for her work.
Exactly, or maybe she's alleging that someone is using her name or likeness without her permission, for merchandise or something like that.
Wow. I mean, any one of these things could be a huge legal battle on its own.
Oh, absolutely, and we're talking about all of them potentially wrapped up in this one lawsuit.
Plus, remember, we have that amended complaint looming in the background.
Oh, right, that's right. She could add even more claims or shift her strategy completely.
I know, it's like trying to hit a moving target.
Exactly. It's going to be interesting to see how the defendants respond to that.
Well, what's interesting to me is that putting aside all the legal maneuvering for a second, this case really highlights some of the bigger issues in the music industry.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, you have Dawn Richard, who's a talented artist, and she's going up against some of the biggest names in the business.
You're right. It's a David and Goliath situation.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what kind of experience led her to file this lawsuit. What kind of roadblocks or injustices did she face?
It's a good question, and I think it speaks to the power dynamics in the music industry. Artists often have to fight really hard to get their voices heard and to get what they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to focus on the glamorous side of the music world, the awards shows, the hit songs, but we don't always see the struggles that artists go through behind the scenes.
Exactly, and this case is a reminder that there's a whole other side to the music industry, a side that's full of contracts and negotiations and legal battles.
It's like a whole different world, and this lawsuit is giving us a glimpse into that world.
Exactly. And I think it's important to remember that these legal battles, they have real consequences for artists.
Yeah.
They can impact their careers, their finances, their creative freedom.
Yeah, it's not just about winning or losing in court, it's about their livelihood.
Exactly.
So, okay, let's say for a moment that these defendants who are trying to get dismissed, they're not successful, and the case moves forward.
Okay.
What happens then?
Well, then things start to get really interesting because the case moves into what's called discovery.
Discovery?
Yeah, it's basically the investigation phase of the lawsuit. Both sides get to gather evidence, interview witnesses, and really build their case.
So they're like detectives trying to piece together what happened.
Exactly. And with a case this complex, with so many defendants involved, discovery can be a long and expensive process.
I bet.
Yeah, think about it. You have to track down documents. You have to schedule interviews. You have to coordinate with all these different parties. It's a logistical nightmare.
Yeah, and on top of all that, you still have that potential amended complaint hanging over everything.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true. So the whole landscape of the case could shift at any moment.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the judge is going to have their hands full trying to manage all of this.
No kidding. I wouldn't want to be in their shoes.
So let me just recap here for a second just to make sure I'm following everything. We've got Dawn Richard, our plaintiff, with a story that's still unfolding. We've got Sean Combs and a whole bunch of other music industry heavy hitters, some of whom are trying to bow out early. And we've got a judge who's basically trying to keep this whole crazy train on the tracks.
That's a perfect summary. You've got it.
All right, good, because my head is spinning a little bit.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is, but it's also incredibly fascinating. You know, for someone who's not a lawyer, who's just listening to this case unfold, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for them?
Well, I think it shows just how complicated the music industry really is. We see the glitz and glamour, but behind the scenes, there's all this legal stuff going on. Contracts, negotiations, lawsuits.
Yeah, it's like a whole hidden world.
Exactly. And I think this case gives us a glimpse into that world.
And it reminds us that even in the digital age, with streaming and all that, the legal side of music is still incredibly important.
Absolutely.
I mean, these issues, they affect everyone, from the artists to the record labels to the fans.
That's right.
So it's definitely something worth paying attention to.
Agreed.
Yeah, it's wild to think about all the stuff that happens behind the scenes before we even get to hear a song.
Yeah, it's a whole other world. And in this case, it's like we're peeking behind the curtain.
Exactly. And you know, it also makes me think about just how important it is for artists to understand the legal side of the music industry.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah, if you know your rights, you can protect yourself and make sure you're getting what you deserve.
Exactly. And this case could actually have some pretty big implications for the industry as a whole.
Oh, in what way?
Well, depending on how it's decided, it could set some new precedents for how contracts are negotiated or how intellectual property rights are enforced.
Oh, wow. So this case, it could potentially change the game for everyone.
It could. Yeah, it's definitely one to watch.
That's for sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning of the story.
Exactly. And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there for now.
Ah, I know, but that's the nature of these deep dives, right?
We always end up with more questions than answers.
That's true, but that's what makes it so interesting.
Exactly. So for our listeners out there who are now just as hooked on this case as we are, what what should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking themselves?
Well, I think the biggest one is, what will that amended complaint reveal?
Yeah.
What new details will Dawn Richard bring to light?
Yeah. I mean, will she double down on her existing claims or will she go in a completely different direction?
Exactly, and how will the defendants respond to that?
Yeah.
Will they change their strategies? Will more of them try to get out of the case?
And the million-dollar question is, what are those initial claims, and what could possibly be so big that it's brought all these major players to the legal table?
Right. What's the story behind this lawsuit?
It's a real cliffhanger, and it makes you realize that the music industry, it's not all about fame and fortune. There's a lot of drama, a lot of conflict.
Absolutely. There's a whole other side to the music world, and this case is a perfect example of that.
It really is. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up for today, but the conversation doesn't have to end here.
No way, we want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, head over to our website or our social media channels and let us know what you think of this case so far. What are your predictions?
We love hearing your thoughts.
And of course, we'll be back with more updates on Richard v. Combs as this legal drama continues to unfold. So until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving.
This time, you've really outdone yourself with this case. Talk about a wild ride. It's like a financial thriller with a true crime twist.
It's one of those stories that grabs you from the start and just keeps getting wilder.
Exactly. Every detail uncovers another layer of deception.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all,
Alan J. Plowden.
this guy was living the high life, but little did anyone know. He was funding it all through a series of elaborate mortgage scams.
He was a master manipulator, able to convince even seasoned financial institutions to hand over millions.
So walk us through it. What was his game plan? How did he pull it off?
Well, Plowden was really a product of his time. The early 2000s saw a boom in the mortgage industry, and like many fraudsters, he exploited the system's weaknesses.
Kind of like finding a glitch in the financial matrix and exploiting it for all it's worth.
Precisely. He created these phantom companies, complete with fake addresses and everything, just to secure loans.
Wait, so these companies, they weren't even real?
Not in the slightest. They were just a smokescreen, a way for him to siphon money from lenders who thought they were dealing with legitimate businesses.
It's incredible how easy it seemed for him to manipulate the system.
That's the thing about fraud. It often hinges on exploiting trust and taking advantage of loopholes. And Plowden was a pro at that.
So he'd create these fake companies, get the loans approved, and then what? How did he turn those loans into spendable cash?
That's where his scheme gets even more intricate. He'd convert the loan money into prepaid cards.
Prepaid cards, like the ones you can pick up at the grocery store.
Exactly. And back then, they weren't as closely monitored as traditional debit cards, making them much harder to track.
A perfect tool for someone looking to move money under the radar.
Exactly. He would then systematically withdraw the money, little by little, through ATMs all over the place.
Talk about covering your tracks. So how much are we talking about here? How much money did he actually manage to steal?
From Countrywide Financial alone, he pocketed a staggering $1.4 million.
$1.4 million. Just from one company. You'd think that would set off some serious alarm bells.
You'd think so. But his methods were surprisingly effective. And he didn't do it all alone. Plowden had a mysterious associate, a man named David Taylor.
Ah, yes, David Taylor, the enigma wrapped in a riddle, shrouded in a mortgage scam. What did your research uncover about this guy?
Even with all the information available, Taylor remains a shadowy figure. We know he was found with a fake passport and documents directly tying him to Plowden's schemes.
So he was definitely in on it, but to what extent remains a mystery.
It's hard to say for sure, but his presence adds another layer of intrigue to this already convoluted case. And as if juggling million-dollar mortgage scams wasn't enough, Plowden had a knack for attracting trouble.
Yeah, this wasn't a guy who kept a low profile. He seemed to have a real talent for making risky connections.
You could say he had a hard time staying out of the spotlight, even when it was in his best interest to blend in.
Like that time he was busted trying to launder a huge chunk of cash with an undercover FBI agent.
Right, as if he thought he could outsmart the feds. It's almost comical how he just stumbled into their trap.
It's like he had a sixth sense for danger, except it was completely backward, always leading him towards it.
And that wasn't his only brush with the wrong side of the law. Our sources uncovered a seemingly insignificant detail that ends up playing a surprisingly significant role in this whole saga. His frequent visits to a Bronx rim shop.
A rim shop? As in, for cars? What could that possibly have to do with anything?
It's one of those strange twists of fate that make you wonder if someone was writing this guy's life story. It was at that very rim shop that Plowden crossed paths with Julio Cruz and Edward Blankenau, two individuals who would soon become entangled in his web of deceit with deadly consequences.
So they say, right? Money attracts all kinds.
And in Plowden's case, it wasn't just eager investors he attracted. His lavish lifestyle, built on ill-gotten gains, caught the eye of someone looking for a way out, someone willing to take a gamble. Gina Conway.
And boy, did she gamble big time. What's the story there? Who was Gina in all of this?
She was someone who got caught in a web, I think. Met Plowden by chance, knew he was bad news from the jump, but the allure of easy money, the escape it offered, it was too tempting, I think.
It's hard to resist the pull of that kind of lifestyle, especially when you're looking for a way out of your own reality.
Exactly. And Plowden, he knew how to exploit those vulnerabilities. He used his wealth to control those around him. And sadly, Gina became just another pawn in his game.
A classic case of a wolf in sheep's clothing, using his ill-gotten gains to lure people in.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But Gina wasn't the only one drawn to Plowden's world. Her boyfriend, aspiring rapper Max B, saw an opportunity, but not one that involves staying on the right side of the law.
This is where things take that dark turn, right? From
Yeah.
shady business deals to a full-blown criminal plot. Tell me more about Max B. What was his role in all of this?
Charlie Max B. Wingate. He was young, ambitious, dreamed of making it big in the music industry, but somewhere along the line, that ambition took a wrong turn.
Driven to desperate measures, perhaps?
Maybe, but maybe also blinded by the allure of fast money and the idea that he could outsmart someone like Plowden. He, along with Gina, concocted a plan to rob Plowden blind.
So they thought they could just steal from a guy who was already knee-deep in illegal activities and somehow come out on top?
The irony isn't lost on me either, but that's the thing about desperation. It can cloud judgment, make you believe you're invincible. They thought they could disappear with his cash and start a new life. Max B even brought in an associate, Kelvin Leardam, to help.
And that's where those chance encounters, those seemingly insignificant connections Plowden made, come back into play, right? The ones at that Bronx rim shop.
Exactly. It all went down at a Holiday Inn in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Max B sent Gina and Leardam to do the deed. But here's the kicker. Giselle Neves, the woman connected to those guys from the rim shop. She was already in on a separate scheme, a plan to steal Plowden's car. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
Wait, so you're telling me that on top of everything else, there was another layer of scheming going on? It's like a bad joke, except with real-life consequences.
Tell me about it. Leardam enters the room, gun drawn, demands the cash, but Plowden, cool as a cucumber, claims he doesn't have it on him, says his partner, David Taylor, is the one with the money.
Hold on. Let me get this straight. They plan to rob this guy who's already involved in who knows how many other schemes, and he doesn't even have the money on him. This is insane.
It gets worse. David Taylor, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding, walks right into the lion's den.
Oh no, you know what's coming next.
A confrontation, a struggle, a shot fired. David Taylor, cut in the crossfire of this whole mess, ends up dead.
All because of a robbery gone wrong, a plan fueled by greed and desperation.
And you know what gets me? Those seemingly insignificant connections, they often have the most explosive consequences. Plowden's lavish lifestyle, his need to flaunt his ill-gotten gains, it drew in Gina, who brought in Max B, who then involved Kelvin Leardam. It's like a domino effect, one bad decision leading to another.
It really highlights how interconnected our lives are, how even the smallest choices can have ripple effects we could never anticipate. So now we have a man dead, a tangled web of lies and deceit, and a group of people scrambling to save themselves. What happened next? How did the investigation unfold?
Well, the investigation itself was almost as messy as the crime. Conflicting accounts, half-truths, finger-pointing, you name it. It was a tangled mess.
Sounds like a prosecutor's nightmare. Who did they focus on?
Gina Conway became the key witness, the one who could tie everything together. She was there for the robbery, but remember, she was also under the influence at the time.
Right, which obviously throws a wrench into things. How reliable could her testimony really be?
Exactly, and to make matters worse, her story kept changing. She initially claimed she was forced into it, that Leardam made her go along with the robbery, but then during her testimony, she backtracked, said she wasn't under duress after all.
So not exactly a slam dunk for the prosecution. Did they have any physical evidence to work with? What about Kelvin Leardam?
They had some circumstantial stuff, things like Plowden's laptop ending up in the hands of people connected to Max B, but no smoking gun, so to speak. And as for Leardam, there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. Some even doubted he fired the fatal shot.
Wait, seriously? If not him, then who? Did they ever figure that out?
It's one of the lingering questions in this whole case. Even Giselle Neves, remember her? The woman involved in the car theft scheme with Plowden.
How could I forget? Another layer of crazy in this whole onion of a story.
Right. Well, even she added fuel to the fire. She suggested that maybe, just maybe, Plowden was somehow in on the robbery all along. Said he seemed oddly calm after Taylor was shot.
Whoa. Okay, so now we're talking about a whole new level of conspiracy. This is insane. What happened when they finally went to trial? Did any of these theories hold up in court?
Despite the lack of hard evidence, Max B., Kelvin Leardam, and Gina Conway were all charged. The prosecution's case hinged on Gina's testimony, shaky as it was, and those circumstantial links to Plowden.
And what about Plowden? Did he manage to escape any consequences?
Not quite. Remember, he cooperated with the authorities, which is probably why he wasn't charged with anything related to the robbery or Taylor's death. However, his luck ran out when it came to the mortgage fraud charges. He ended up being convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to a hefty 24 years.
So even the mastermind behind it all couldn't outrun justice forever. What about Max B. and Leardam? What were their sentences?
They were both found guilty of felony murder, robbery, and a slew of other charges. Looking back, many believe that the decision to try them together was a mistake. Their defenses contradicted each other, ultimately weakening both of their cases.
A classic example of a case where everyone loses, some more than others. What about Gina Conway? What happened to her?
She took a plea deal in exchange for her testimony, which is
Yeah.
pretty standard in cases like this. She ended up with a much lighter sentence compared to Max B. and Leardam.
It's a tragic end to a story fueled by greed, ambition, and a whole lot of bad decisions. It really makes you think twice about the price of easy money and the company we keep.
No doubt. But there's another layer to this whole thing, a layer that adds a whole other dimension to the idea of ambition and exploitation in the music industry, and that's Max B's relationship with Jim Jones.
Oh, right. I'd almost forgotten about that part. Didn't Jones start out as a mentor to Max B early in his career?
He did. Took him under his wing, showed him the ropes, the whole 9 yards.
Right.
But as Max B's career began to take off, gaining recognition for his unique style and flow, well, let's just say things got complicated.
So instead of celebrating his success, Jones saw it as a threat.
Many believe so. There are those who say that Jones saw an opportunity in Max B's incarceration. He allegedly used his influence to gain control of Max B's publishing rights, essentially profiting off his music while he was behind bars.
Talk about adding insult to injury. It's a classic story of betrayal, a cautionary tale about the dark side of the music industry.
Absolutely. It really makes you wonder about the motivations at play. Was it pure greed, professional jealousy, or a combination of both?
It's hard to say for sure, but one thing's for certain. This whole case is a tangled web of deceit, ambition, and ultimately, tragedy. It's a story about the choices we make, the people we trust, and the often unforeseen consequences that follow.
Well said. It's a reminder that sometimes the most compelling stories aren't just about the crimes themselves, but about the human drama that unfolds in their wake.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from million-dollar mortgage scams to a robbery gone wrong, and even a glimpse into the cutthroat world of the music industry.
It's been a wild ride, that's for sure. But if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from all of this, it's that the truth is often far stranger and far more complicated than fiction.
And on that note, we'll leave you with this. What became of Max B's music career? Did his unique style and influence endure despite his incarceration? Or was his potential ultimately overshadowed by the tragic events that unfolded? We'll leave that for you to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
All right, get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into a theory that's like, I don't know, a hip-hop remix of The Crown or something. Remember how you were saying you wanted to unpack all those hidden power structures?
Hmm.
Well, this deep dive, this one takes the cake. We're going to be talking about a possible link between those hip-hop giants, Diddy and Jay-Z, and get this, the British royal family. Yeah, you heard that right. The source material you sent over, it lays out this whole theory. And look, we're not saying it's, the gospel truth or anything, but it's definitely got us thinking.
Hmm.
What do you make of this whole thing claiming that Prince Philip was like a major player in all of this?
Well, it's definitely a bold claim, that's for sure. I mean, usually when we think of Prince Philip, we picture, well, a figurehead, right? But this source material, it paints him as this, like, shrewd operator, like someone who knew that Britain's old ways of, like, wielding power, they were fading, especially as hip-hop started taking over the world in the 90s.
Yeah, you got to admit, it's a pretty wild twist. You've got the 90s, hip-hop's blowing up everywhere, and then this text comes along and suggests that the royals were actually looking for ways to, like, tap into that, to control it even.
It really makes you wonder, if we just, like, for a second, take this whole narrative at face value. Someone like Prince Philip, so tied to the old world order, he might have seen hip-hop as more than just, like, a cash cow. It was a way to stay relevant. Imagine that. British influence wasn't about colonies or trade routes anymore. It was about dictating what was cool, what shaped, youth culture across the globe.
They wanted a piece of the whole hip-hop kingdom for themselves. Yeah. And then we get to this supposed meeting in Switzerland back in '97. According to all of this, Diddy, then, up-and-coming Jay-Z, and some members of the British royal family all end up in the same place at the same time.
And this is where we got to put on our skeptical hats, right? The text says this meeting was no accident, that it was all planned out, a meeting to, let's just say, explore some mutually beneficial opportunities, right? But the big question is, where's the proof? Besides this one source, that is. Imagine trying to find proof of a secret meeting like that. We'd be talking financial records, leaked schedules, maybe even like memoirs from people who were close to this whole circle.
That's like trying to, I don't know, catch smoke with your bare hands or something. But, okay, let's just say we entertain the idea for a minute. The text thing gets really vague about what this so-called deal actually was.
And yet what we see in the years after this supposed meeting is that both Diddy and Jay-Z's careers just explode. They're not just successful, they become global icons. They build empires that span music, fashion, everything.
Exactly. They became powerhouses, right?
Yeah.
So is it just their talent, their business sense, or did this alleged royal connection, with all its resources and influence, play a role?
It's like, how do I put this? It's like trying to figure out if a tree grew so fast because of the soil, or because someone snuck in some super fertilizer that nobody knows about. This source material throws out the idea of shell companies, saying royal money was secretly woven into Diddy and Jay-Z's businesses. That's a claim that, well, you'd need a whole team of forensic accountants to even try and unravel.
And speaking of things that are hard to track down, the text also mentions Jay-Z's lyrics from back then. He's got lines about diamonds from Sierra Leone, and he's making connections with UK investors. On the surface, it just looks like a smart businessman making moves, expanding his portfolio. But if we even consider what the text is suggesting, it makes you wonder if these weren't like subtle hints, breadcrumbs leading back to this whole web of influence.
We tend to think about cultural influence as like this subtle thing, this invisible force. But this source, it's saying it can be way more deliberate, like almost like a chess game, you know what I mean? Where you've got these
Yeah.
players moving their pieces across this global board.
And by the mid-2000s, hip-hop's influence, it's like everywhere, right? So the stakes in this, like, supposed game, they would have been huge.
Okay, so imagine this. Hip-hop is shaping everything. Fashion, the way people talk, even politics to a certain extent. And you've got this text suggesting that the British monarchy, with all its history and tradition, might be trying to get in on that.
So it's not just about the money anymore at this point. It's about controlling the narrative, right?
Yeah.
Like shaping how the world sees them.
Exactly. It's about staying relevant. The text is saying that for these institutions, these old institutions like the monarchy, staying relevant, it means adapting. And in this case, maybe that means cozying up to people like Diddy and Jay-Z who have their fingers on the pulse.
It's, I don't know, it's kind of a wild thought, right? But to make their point, the text brings up this supposed dinner at Kensington Palace back in 2008. Okay, so picture this. Jay-Z and Beyoncé, at the top of their game, they're having dinner not just with royalty, but with these high-ranking government officials, these like shadowy financiers.
The text makes it seem like this clandestine meeting, the intersection of entertainment, politics, and global power all in one room.
Okay, I gotta ask, what was on the menu? Did they have a secret handshake? This is serious intrigue.
Well, the text doesn't get into those specifics, unfortunately, but it suggests this dinner, it was about getting Jay-Z's foot in the door in Europe,
Yeah.
solidifying him as this global icon.
With, of course, the implicit support of the British establishment.
Right, exactly. It's painting this picture of an arrangement where everyone wins. Jay-Z gets access to new markets, new audiences, the whole nine yards, and the powers that be, they get to use his influence, especially over young people.
But okay, let's play devil's advocate here for a second. Even if this dinner happened, is there anything besides this text saying it was anything more than just a social thing? Maybe someone just thought it'd be cool to invite some interesting people to dinner.
See, that's the kind of critical thinking we got to do here. It's easy to get caught up in the story, but we got to ask ourselves, what else could have helped Jay-Z become so globally famous? Were there other events, other deals that actually mattered more?
It's like solving a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
We had this one clue, this dinner, but we need more pieces to really see the whole picture.
Exactly. And this is where things get even more complicated because as we move into the 2010s, the text starts saying that the relationship between Diddy, Jay-Z, and this whole alleged web of influence, it starts to fall apart.
Wait, so it wasn't all champagne and roses?
Not exactly. What the text is saying is that there was a price for this supposed deal, for this success, and Diddy and Jay-Z were starting to realize what that price was.
They're like at the top,
Mhm.
right? But they might be stuck in this deal, this situation they can't get out of.
Yeah, like they're on this tightrope between, like you said, massive power, but also maybe being controlled.
And the text is saying that by the 2010s, it finally hit them both. Know what this whole alleged deal really cost.
Imagine that, though. You get to the top, you have everything you ever wanted, but then you realize you might not be calling the shots in your own life, your own career even.
Man, that's kind of dark when you think about it.
It really is. It makes you question this whole idea of fame, Like, at what point does success, especially in music where image is everything, at what point does it come with, strings attached?
The text even says that things like, remember that whole Jay-Z Nas feud? Huge deal in the hip-hop world. They're suggesting even that might have been, orchestrated to keep Jay-Z in line, to distract from something bigger going on.
That's a bold statement for sure. And we got to be careful about, saying someone did something for a specific reason without having, solid proof.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it does get you thinking, right?
Yeah.
About the stories we tell, the narratives we're given, and who's really behind them, shaping them.
It's like a magic trick, You're so busy watching the show, the illusion, that you miss the strings, the ones actually making it all happen.
And get this is where the text goes even darker, talking about some of the biggest tragedies in hip-hop. They're implying that the deaths of Tupac and Biggie, which still resonate so strongly today, were somehow connected to all of this. Maybe to, maintain control over where hip-hop was going.
Whoa, okay, we got to pause here for a second. That's a serious, serious accusation, and it's not something to throw around lightly.
No, absolutely not. And to be clear, the text, it doesn't give any actual proof to back that up.
We have to approach these kinds of topics, these sensitive topics, with care and respect. We got to separate speculation from actual facts.
It's a good reminder that even when we're going down these rabbit holes, thinking about different theories, we can't just say whatever we want.
Exactly. At the end of the day, that's what this deep dive is all about. It's about looking at what we're told and asking questions, thinking critically.
So where do we go from here? The text kind of ends on this open-ended note, saying that Diddy and Jay-Z, they know about this whole alleged deal. They might even be trying to, subtly fight back against it.
Maybe the biggest takeaway is this. Next time you see someone like that, a huge musician, a global brand, anyone at the top of their game, remember this story. Even if you don't believe every single detail, it makes you think, right? Power works in weird ways, behind-the-scenes ways.
It's like they say, once you see it, you can't unsee it,
That's it, exactly. It's about understanding that there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface, especially with fame, power, all of that.
Well, this has definitely given us a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, going down this rabbit hole with us.
And remember, keep asking questions, keep an open mind.
That's all the time we have for today.
Until next time.
All right, strap yourselves in.
All right, get ready for a deep dive into a wild legal case from 2004. We're talking a missing Grammy Award, accusations of, well, a conspiracy, and a whole lot of questions. I bet you're wondering, how does a Grammy even go missing? Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to unpack this whole thing using actual court documents, and legal opinions from a case called Vasquez v. Combs. So buckle up, because this one takes us through the world of hip-hop, power dynamics, and, some pretty intense legal battles.
Yeah, what I find so interesting about this case, it really shows how celebrity and power can intertwine with the legal system. And I think as we go through the details, we're going to see those forces at play.
For sure. So let's set the stage here. I'm sure you've heard of Sean P. Diddy Combs, the rapper, producer, entrepreneur behind Bad Boy Entertainment. Back in the early 2000s, Diddy and Bad Boy, they were at the top of the hip-hop world.
Absolutely, and that's where our other main player comes in, Damian Vasquez. He had kind of an on-again, off-again work history with Bad Boy, which is pretty key to this whole story.
It all starts with an envelope back in 2002. Seemed pretty ordinary at the time. It had these contact sheets inside with names and numbers for people in the industry, including, Diddy himself. But life happened, right? Vasquez ends up in a car accident, and that envelope gets tucked away in a box at his parents' house and basically forgotten.
Right. Fast forward to 2003, Vasquez finds that envelope again. After over a year, who knows what he thought was in there. But when he saw Diddy's info, he decided to do the right thing. He emails Diddy to offer to return those contact sheets. And Diddy replies. They exchange a few emails back and forth. Seems pretty simple so far, wouldn't you say?
Totally. But here's where things take a turn. Vasquez hears a rumor that Diddy is missing a Grammy Award, and that he's spending a lot of money, like hiring private investigators, to find it. And now remember that Bad Boy employee I mentioned? Well, Vasquez remembers a conversation where this employee claimed to have access to Diddy's Grammys. So what does Vasquez do? He sends Diddy another email.
And this email, it's cryptic, almost like a riddle. It's hard to say exactly what Vasquez was going for, but it definitely got Diddy's attention.
Right, so now you've got Diddy missing a Grammy, and maybe a little worried that someone might have it. And you've got Vasquez, this former employee, sending these mysterious emails. You can almost feel the tension, can't you? And this is just the beginning.
Exactly. And now a new character enters the scene. A woman named Frazier calls Vasquez up. She invites him for an interview, gives him an address in Manhattan. Vasquez, thinking it's a job interview, shows up. And where is he? A police station.
Wow, talk about a plot twist, right? And not just any police station. It's the New York Police Department's Midtown South Precinct, one of the busiest in the city. They take him upstairs. He meets Frazier. And right there, near her desk, a photo of Diddy. What do you think was going through his mind at that point?
I can only imagine, and it gets even weirder. Vasquez tells Frazier he's diabetic and needs to take his medication. But according to him, they just ignored that.
So they start questioning him for hours about alleged crank calls, those contact sheets he found, and of course the missing Grammy. All while Frazier is calling Bad Boy, like seeking guidance and advice based on what Vasquez is saying.
See, this is where you start to see those power dynamics I was talking about. Did Diddy and Bad Boy have too much influence on this investigation? Was Frazier really just trying to confirm things, or was there something more going on? Vasquez was definitely feeling the pressure as the hours went by. He even asks about getting a lawyer.
But Frazier tells him he doesn't need one. And she even repeats that to his mom when she calls the station, worried sick about her son.
Wow, that really makes you question how this was handled. It just adds another layer to the story, how stressful this whole thing was for Vasquez.
And remember, Vasquez is diabetic. He and his mom both tell Frazier he needs to eat. But according to Vasquez, nothing. His blood sugar drops dangerously low, and he passes out right there in a holding cell.
Oh, man, that must have been terrifying for him, caught in this crazy situation. And his basic medical needs are just ignored.
He finally wakes up in an ambulance, handcuffed to a stretcher, on his way to the hospital for emergency treatment. They give him insulin, and then guess what?
They let him go?
Nope, they take him right back to the police station.
Right to the police station.
Back to the police station, and the interrogation continues. This time, it's not just Frazier, but several detectives grilling him about the Grammys. And get this, Vasquez says through this whole ordeal, no one ever formally told him he was under arrest or read him his rights.
You're kidding? Handcuffed to a stretcher, back to the station after a medical emergency? And he hasn't even been officially arrested. This is crazy.
It really is, but wait, it gets even crazier. They fingerprint him, photograph him, and take him back to the hospital again because he needs more insulin. Still handcuffed to the stretcher.
This case is just unbelievable. It really shows how things can get out of control, especially when you've got high-profile people like Diddy involved. We need to take a break here, but when we come back, we'll get into the charges against Vasquez and what happened after that second trip to the hospital.
You won't want to miss it. This story is just getting started. Welcome back. We were talking about Damian Vasquez's very long day at the police station, questioned for hours, passing out from low blood sugar, back and forth to the hospital, all while handcuffed to a stretcher.
And the whole time, he's saying he was never actually told he was under arrest.
Yeah, it's wild. So what happens next?
So almost a full day after that first interview, Vasquez finally sees a judge. This is called an arraignment, right, where they tell you what you're being charged with. And for Vasquez, it's some pretty serious stuff. Aggravated harassment, petite larceny, criminal possession of stolen property. Basically, they're saying he harassed Diddy, stole something valuable, and had stolen goods.
Wow, that's heavy stuff. Plus, Frazier, that woman from the police station, she gets restraining orders against Vasquez, meaning he can't contact Diddy at all. It's crazy how it went from returning some contact info to facing criminal charges and a restraining order.
It really is. But here's the thing. It doesn't end there. Vasquez doesn't just claim he's innocent. He drops a bombshell. He says there was a conspiracy. He believes Diddy, people at Bad Boy, and Detective Frazier, they all worked together to force a confession out of him about the missing Grammy.
A conspiracy? That's a big accusation. What evidence did he have?
Well, he pointed to a few things, like those calls Frazier made to Bad Boy during the interrogation, where she was asking for guidance and advice. Vasquez felt that showed they were working together to build a case against him. Plus, the fact that he was questioned for so long, denied medical care. He felt like it was all meant to pressure him, to make him say what they wanted. Basically, that Diddy and Bad Boy were using their power to manipulate the legal system.
That's serious. So how did the judge handle this conspiracy claim? Did he think Vasquez's rights were violated?
Okay, so it's important to remember, the burden of proof in a civil case like this, it's different than criminal court. In a civil case, the person making the claim has to show it's more likely than not that the other party did what they're accused of. The judge here, he decided that what Vasquez was saying, while concerning, it wasn't enough to prove that there was a deliberate violation of his civil rights.
So even though those calls to Bad Boy during questioning seem suspicious, it wasn't proof enough of a conspiracy for the judge.
Right. The judge said just because someone files a police report, asks for an investigation, even if they're exaggerating or leaving things out, it doesn't automatically mean their civil rights were violated. There has to be more to it. And he pointed out, Vasquez didn't give specifics about what was actually said on those calls between Frazier and Bad Boy. So maybe the judge thought she was just double-checking facts, trying to understand the situation.
So the judge thought maybe Frazier was just doing her job as an investigator.
Yeah, exactly. The judge acknowledged, yeah, there are questions here about whether powerful people, celebrities, can they use their influence on law enforcement in unfair ways? But he didn't find enough evidence to say that Diddy, Bad Boy, and Frazier had a plan, a deliberate plan to, violate Vasquez's rights. And that's important, legally speaking.
Got it. So no proof of a conspiracy to violate his rights. But what about those charges against him? What happened with those?
Well, that's where things get a little messy. Remember, this case was going on in both federal and state court. The judge, he dismissed those federal claims Vasquez made. But he said, hey, maybe you could pursue those accusations in state court because the burden of proof there can be a bit different. He also dismissed the state law claims, but that was mostly because of jurisdiction stuff. Like he felt those claims belonged in state court.
So even though the federal claims were out, Vasquez could still try for justice in state court?
Exactly. But here's the catch. The documents we have, they don't tell us what happened next. Did Vasquez keep fighting the case in state court? Was there some kind of settlement behind the scenes? We don't know. It's like a cliffhanger ending.
It's pretty wild how a story that starts with a missing Grammy and a guy trying to do the right thing ends up with so much mystery, so many unanswered questions.
It really does make you think about how complex the legal system can be and how hard it can be to know exactly what happened, especially with high-profile people involved and those power dynamics we talked about.
For sure. Well, we'll dive into some of those complexities when we come back. For the final part of our deep dive into this fascinating case. Welcome back to our deep dive. It's just crazy to me how a story about a missing Grammy can bring up so many questions about, power, perception, the legal system itself.
It really is a case study, isn't it? Even though that conspiracy claim was dismissed,
Yeah.
there's still a lot to think about here.
Totally. So let's kind of shift gears a bit and talk about some of the bigger implications of this case. One thing that really stood out to me was like the whole idea of access to justice. You've got Vasquez, this former employee, going up against Diddy, who has lawyers, resources, I mean, the whole 9 yards. How do you even fight a legal battle when it feels like the odds are so stacked against you?
It's a huge point. And this case, even though it didn't officially find a conspiracy, it really shows those power imbalances that can happen in the legal system. It makes you wonder, how fair can things really be when one side has way more money and influence?
And then there's the whole celebrity thing, right? Diddy's fame, his image, it definitely played a role in how this all went down, from the media attention to how people saw both Vasquez and Diddy. Do you think, like, is there a halo effect with celebrities where people just automatically believe them more because they're famous?
It's definitely worth thinking about, isn't it? Does fame create bias, even if we don't realize it? Like, does it make us see evidence differently? Or how someone acts? Does it give certain people credibility, access that others just don't have? I don't know if there are easy answers, but it's something to consider.
And thinking about this case, it also made me think about the role of the media. We've been talking about the legal stuff, but this whole thing was playing out in public. How much do you think media coverage shaped what people thought about this case? Could it have even affected the legal process?
The media in high-profile cases like this, it's always tricky. On one hand, they can bring transparency, hold powerful people accountable, shine a light on things that are wrong. But on the other hand, they can create bias, make things more dramatic than they are, and maybe even mess with how fair a trial is. It's complicated. There's no easy answer.
And we talked about how this case really comes down to two different sides of the story. Vasquez saying he was targeted, pressured into a confession. Diddy and Bad Boy saying they were just reacting to what they saw as a threat. When there's no clear answer, how do we even figure out what the truth is?
That's the tough part, right?
Yeah.
We're left with these two stories, and it's hard to know for sure what happened. This case shows us that even though the law tries to be fair, it still comes down to people making decisions, and people can be wrong, influenced by things.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key things you hope our listener takes away?
Well, for me, this case shows that the law isn't always so simple. There's nuance. And sometimes, even after all the legal stuff, you still have more questions than answers. It also shows how important it is to think critically, especially when you're dealing with power dynamics. Conflicting stories and things like media coverage that can influence things.
That's a really good point. It reminds us that we all have to be careful about the information we see, question things, and really think about the stories we're being told.
And maybe think about this. If something like this happened today, with social media, everyone sharing things instantly, would the story be different? Whose voices would be heard and whose would be silenced? It's something to think about as we deal with all this information all the time.
That's a great thought to leave us with, even though this case might be over. The things it brings up about power, justice, perception, they're more important than ever. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming and stay curious. All right, strap in, everybody, because today's deep dive is about to get seriously wild.
Buckle up is right.
You guys have sent over some seriously juicy stuff about WAC 100, court documents, articles, even a wild video. And let me tell you, this is no ordinary music industry drama.
Yeah, this is not your average contract dispute.
Not at all. We're talking accusations, lawsuits, and even whispers of the FBI.
It's a tangled web, all right, and we're about to untangle it thread by thread.
Exactly. See, most people know WAC 100 as this big-time music executive, right?
Yeah.
The guy behind artists like The Game and Blueface.
Mm-hmm.
You even mentioned how he helped 6ix9ine navigate all those contracts.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, let's be real, took some serious maneuvering.
Cash Jones, as he's known off stage, has built a reputation for being, well, shrewd. You can even say ruthless. And this is a business notorious for both.
Definitely.
But, like you said, that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, we're going way beyond his business dealings today. We're diving headfirst into some shocking accusations, and it's all fueled by this video titled The Paperwork Party, WAC 100 Exposed. Have you had a chance to watch it?
I have, and let me tell you, it is explosive.
Yeah.
The video makers are claiming WAC 100 is an FBI informant.
You're kidding, an informant?
Yeah.
Wait, explain that. Why is that such a big deal in the hip-hop world?
It's massive. Think about it. Hip-hop culture, it's built on this street code, loyalty. keeping silent.
Right.
Being labeled a snitch, especially by law enforcement, is basically the ultimate betrayal.
Okay, so being accused of being an informant is huge, I get it. But how did Shaq, as in Shaquille O'Neal, get dragged into all of this?
This is where it gets really wild.
Yeah.
The video centers around a lawsuit filed by Robert Ross, better known as Stutterbox.
Okay.
He's suing Shaq for allegedly orchestrating his kidnapping back in 2008.
Whoa, hold on, Shaq kidnapping. Okay, we are officially down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it goes even deeper. Stutterbox claims Shaq asked him to kill multiple people,
Wait, what?
including a gang member, a record producer, even a woman Shaq allegedly got pregnant.
Okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, we need to emphasize that these are just accusations in a lawsuit.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that this is just one side of the story. But even with that said, the accusations are shocking.
They're insane. So where does WAC 100 fit into this whole kidnapping and alleged hit list situation? This is where we get to the heart of this deep dive, right? So we've got this lawsuit, we've got Shaq, and we've got WAC 100 accused of being an FBI informant. Lay it on me. How do these things all connect?
Well, it all comes down to this alleged wiretap.
Okay.
Stutterbox claims that while the FBI was investigating the Main Street Mafia Crips, they caught WAC 100 on tape, right?
Yeah.
Talking to a high-ranking gang member named Dale Dog.
Okay, so they're listening in on these conversations, but what were they saying that got Stutterbox so worked up?
According to Stutterbox in the video, WAC was giving information to Dale Dog, information that Stutterbox says could have gotten him killed.
Wow. Okay, so that's terrifying. But in the video, do we actually get to hear this wiretap?
They don't play the actual audio, but they claim to have a transcript.
Okay.
And in the document, they point out that WAC 100 is referred to as BAC and CS2, which they say stands for Confidential Source 2. They use this to imply that WAC was working with the FBI.
Wow. That's pretty damning if it's true. Is there any other evidence, or is it just Stutterbox's word against WAC 100's?
Oh, there's more.
Okay.
The video actually includes a recording of a phone call where WAC confronts Stutterbox directly about these accusations.
Oh, man. I bet that was intense. What went down? What happened?
You can hear the tension in both their voices.
Oh, I bet.
Stutterbox is basically like, dude, I heard you on the wiretap, your name's in the paperwork.
Yeah.
And WAC denies it, of course, but it's clear there's some serious bad blood between them.
Yeah. You don't need to be a voice expert to pick up on that, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this alleged wiretap, this heated phone call. But it still feels a little one-sided, right? Like, is there anyone else backing up Stutterbox's story?
That's where Mark Stevens comes in,
Okay.
Shaq's business partner.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He actually appears in the video, and he supports Stutterbox's claims that WAC 100 was an informant.
Oh, wait, really? Shaq's own business partner is out there calling WAC 100 a snitch? What's his angle?
Stevens claims that WAC 100 was trying to use his connections to set up a meeting between Stevens and, remember, Dale Dog, the gang leader.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
So WAC's running around playing matchmaker for Shaq's business partner and a high-ranking gang member. This is getting hard to follow.
I know, it's a lot. Basically, Stevens claims that WAC was trying to pump Stutterbox for information to pass on to Dale Dog. He suggests WAC was playing both sides, acting like he was helping Stevens while secretly working with the FBI.
It's like something out of a movie. You've got this tangled web of players, accusations flying everywhere, and at the center of it all is WAC 100. So if Stevens is to be believed, what's the end game here? What was WAC even hoping to achieve? So WAC's running around, playing both sides, trying to arrange these shady meetings. What's the big picture here? What's Stevens' take on WAC's motives?
Yeah, Stevens doesn't hold back. He calls WAC, quote, the well-dressed lie,
Ooh, okay.
accusing him of spinning this web of deception around Shaq and Big U.
We haven't talked much about Big U. Reminder, who is he again, and why is he part of this messy situation?
Right, good catch. Big U is another powerful figure in the music industry.
Right.
And according to Stevens, he was close with WAC 100. But after seeing this alleged paperwork, Big U supposedly cut ties with WAC completely.
Wow, talk about adding fuel to the fire. So we've got these explosive allegations from Stutterbox and Stevens, but we do have to acknowledge the other side of the coin here, right?
Absolutely.
WAC 100 has denied being an informant. And we need to remember, these accusations haven't been proven in court.
Exactly. We only have this glimpse into the situation, right? Like a snapshot from a very specific angle. There's a whole lot we just don't know.
That's what makes this so fascinating, right? It's like we're looking at a puzzle with like half the pieces missing. But even with what we do have, This WAC 100 character is shaping up to be quite the enigma. I mean, this isn't even his first time being caught up in controversy.
Oh, not even close.
Right.
Remember all that stuff with the Kim Kardashian or Ray J sex tape? Or the allegations that he made about Nipsey Hussle?
Right. And the guy has a knack for getting into very public feuds, too.
Yeah.
Gucci Mane, Lil Baby, he's gone toe-to-toe with some big names.
Which begs the question, is WAC 100 a master manipulator? Like someone who thrives on chaos and controversy? Or is he a savvy businessman who's been caught in a dangerous game, possibly even framed?
Those are the million-dollar questions, aren't they? So after this deep dive, where do we even begin to unpack all of this? What's the takeaway for someone at home trying to make sense of it all?
You know, for me, it really highlights the power and the potential pitfalls of information in this day and age. We are bombarded with content, especially online, and it's easy to get swept up in the drama without stopping to question the source.
It's like that saying, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Except in this case, it's don't believe everything you see in a YouTube video.
Exactly. We have to be critical consumers of information, especially when it comes to unverified claims. And this whole saga with WAC 100 is a stark reminder that things aren't always what they seem.
That's the truth. Well, there you have it, everyone. Our deep dive into the wild world of WAC 100.
It's a wild one.
We've explored the allegations, examined the alleged evidence, and uncovered a whole lot of unanswered questions. We've seen how loyalty, betrayal, and the price of fame can create a tangled web of intrigue. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep digging for answers, and remember, sometimes... All right, so get this. We've got ourselves a deep dive today into a case about a rapper facing a serious health crisis while in prison.
Yeah.
For, get this, witness tampering.
It's a wild one.
We're talking life sentence versus a life-saving transplant.
Yeah, this is going to be good.
This is going to be really interesting.
Really interesting case study because it digs into this question of how we balance justice and mercy
Right.
when you're dealing with inmates who have serious medical conditions.
Yeah, and it's not always as clear-cut as it seems.
Not at all.
So you've brought us legal document from the trial of Charles Sally,
That's right.
who goes by Dark Low.
Uh-huh.
He's a Philadelphia rapper, part of this group OBH,
Yes.
which stands for Get This Original Block Hustlers.
Catchy.
I know.
I know.
Right? Now he's serving 7.5 years for witness tampering.
That's right.
And what's wild is this all went down while he was already battling some pretty intense health problems.
Absolutely. And the witness tampering charge is nothing to sneeze at.
Right.
This is not like a parking ticket. This goes to the core of how our justice system functions.
Okay, so walk us through what exactly did Sally do?
So picture this. You've got a witness who's about to testify against Sally's associates in this big drug trafficking case back in 2019.
Okay.
Days before the trial, this witness receives a letter.
Uh-oh.
And it's not a love letter.
Right.
It's from Sally straight up threatening violence against him.
Uh-huh.
And Dia's girlfriend if he dares to say anything on the stand.
Wow. Talk about intimidation tactics.
Right. And it gets bolder.
Oh, no.
Sally actually shows up at the trial, even on the day this witness is scheduled to testify.
So he's like really doubling down on the intimidation.
Exactly. It's like he wanted his presence to be known to send a message. And unsurprisingly, that same day, Sally's arrested at his home in Delaware.
So this wasn't an impulsive thing. He was really playing the long game.
Oh, absolutely.
Even attending the trial where his associates were eventually found guilty and sentenced.
And that's an important point to remember. This wasn't some minor case.
Right.
His associates were hit with significant sentences, which really emphasizes the gravity of what Sally was involved in.
Okay, so 7.5 years for Sally, plus a $10,000 fine.
That's right.
Did the judge consider his background as a rapper at all?
He did. And there's this really interesting bit in the judge's notes where he calls Sally an accomplished musician. It's like this flicker of humanity in the middle of this very serious legal battle.
Yeah.
A reminder that there's more to Sally than just this one act.
It's true. Everyone has layers, right?
Right.
So how do these health issues that you mentioned factor into all of this? And this is all before the pandemic even hit.
Right. So even before this trial goes down, Sally's dealing with hypertension, a history of heart attacks and strokes.
Wow. Already a lot on his plate.
A lot. And then he's diagnosed with end-stage renal disease. Yeah, we're talking complete kidney failure.
Oh, wow.
He needed a transplant. And while he eventually did receive one, His body rejected it.
Oh, man. So he's fighting for his life while navigating this legal battle.
It's a lot.
That's rough.
And then comes the pandemic.
Right.
Remember those pre-trial motions we talked about?
Yeah.
With COVID-19 hitting, Sally's lawyers argue that prison, especially given his health, is basically a death sentence.
Right.
They're pushing for his release.
Right.
And get this, the judge agrees to home confinement while he waits trial.
So even while facing these serious charges, the judge understood the very real threat of COVID.
Right.
Especially for someone with an already compromised immune system.
Absolutely.
Mm.
He was under strict supervision, but at least he's in a safer environment, likely able to receive better care at home.
Right.
Yeah.
So did he manage to stay out of trouble during this time?
Mostly.
Yeah.
But there was this one incident, a trip to a department store documented on Instagram.
Oh, really? Oh.
A little violation of his confinement, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Classic social media slip-up.
Right.
Always watching.
They're always watching.
Okay, so eventually he has to report to prison to start his sentence?
He does.
Did his health impact where he was sent?
Absolutely. The judge actually made a specific recommendation to the Bureau of Prisons, wanting to ensure that Sally went to a facility that was equipped to handle his very specific needs.
Okay.
He even mentioned mental health evaluations and treatment, suggesting there might be even more to this than just his physical health.
Wow, so it makes you think about the full picture.
Right.
Not just a prison with doctors, but, the right kind of specialists to really address his specific needs.
Exactly, and they followed through sending Sally to FMC Devens in Massachusetts, a federal medical center.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So FMC Devens, that sounds promising. What's the care like there?
So this isn't some dingy prison infirmary.
Okay.
They have both outpatient and inpatient services, 24/7 care, a whole health services department. It's even considered an administrative security federal medical center, which I imagine means it's a step up when it comes to health care in the prison system.
Right.
Yeah.
So Sally's in a facility specifically chosen for its medical capabilities. You'd think that's the end of it, right?
Not quite. Remember, we're talking about a guy who doesn't back down easily.
Right.
Here's where it gets interesting. 6 weeks after arriving at FMC Devens, Sally files a motion for compassionate release.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
That's quick.
It is quick.
Even for someone with his health issues. What
Right.
was his reasoning there?
It does seem like a very short time to give the facility a chance, right?
Right.
But think about it from his perspective. This is someone who has been battling these really serious health problems for a while now. He's in a new, unfamiliar environment.
Mm-hmm.
He's probably feeling very vulnerable, maybe even a little desperate.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So what happens with this compassionate release request?
The judge really digs into Sally's medical records. And
Right.
I mean, we are talking about end-stage renal disease, a history of heart attack and strokes, uncontrolled diabetes, hypertension. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, at that point, it sounds like a textbook case for compassionate release, right?
You'd think so.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. The judge actually agreed that Sally's health, particularly the end-stage renal disease and the ongoing pandemic,
Right.
did constitute extraordinary and compelling reasons for release.
Wait, really?
Yeah,
So he agreed there were valid reasons to let him out,
he did.
but he still denied the request.
He did, and it all boils down to one critical factor in compassionate release cases,
Yeah.
the nature of the crime.
So on one hand, you've got Sally's health, which the judge even says is really serious, especially with the pandemic still going on.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's this witness tampering thing, which, like you said, really cuts to the core of the justice system.
Absolutely.
What did the judge say about that?
He did not mince words. He called witness tampering a direct threat to the legal system, saying it undermines everything.
Right, because without witnesses who feel safe coming forward, the whole system falls apart.
Exactly. And remember, in Sally's case, this wasn't just like a suggestion to stay quiet. This was a direct threat of violence, and not just to the witness, but to their girlfriend, too.
Right, okay, so that's heavy, but even still, if Sally's health is that bad, shouldn't that factor in? Like, how did the judge balance those two things?
So here's where it gets really interesting. The judge basically says, look, Sally knew about his health problems when he took the plea deal. He went into it knowing what the possible sentence could be, knowing that his health was a factor.
So he can't really play the I didn't know card.
Exactly. And the judge even points out that he already gave Sally a break with the whole home confinement thing before the trial, even making that recommendation to the Bureau of Prisons to make sure that Sally got the care that he needed at FMC Devens.
Right, so he's basically saying, I've considered your health at every step. I even went above and beyond to send you to a facility that was equipped for this. I'm not just ignoring it.
Exactly, and that's a crucial point. It
Yeah.
shows that he's not heartless. He's weighing everything, upholding the law, deterring future crime,
Yeah.
and, yeah, Sally's health, too.
Okay, so first request denied. Is that the end of it?
Not for Darklow. A year later, he files a second compassionate release request.
This guy does not give up. What's the basis for this one? Things must have been really bad.
They were all the same problems, the kidney failure especially, and this time he's arguing that the prison isn't doing enough to get him the transplant that he needs.
Wow, and remember the first one failed.
Exactly.
That's scary needing a transplant like that, especially in prison. You're really at the mercy of the system.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. The judge acknowledges how serious it is, saying that, yeah, Sally needs this transplant. Big UT.
There's always a but.
Always. He points out that Sally hasn't actually tried everything within the prison system to address this. He hasn't filed grievances, he hasn't made these formal medical requests, that kind of thing.
So even in what seems like an emergency situation, there's still protocol.
It seems that way, and it raises this bigger question about an inmate's rights. I mean, they have a right to health care, sure, but navigating that system, especially in prison, can't be easy.
It makes you think about the power dynamics in play there. Advocating for yourself is hard enough on the outside, let alone when you're in prison.
Absolutely, and this is something that comes up time and time again, healthcare in the prison system. Is it really designed for timely, effective care? Or is it, sometimes creating more hurdles for people who are already in a tough spot?
Right, so where does this leave Sally?
So the judge denies the second request, and this is key, he denies it without prejudice. Meaning,
He can try again.
exactly, the door's open, especially if his health gets worse, or he can prove that he's tried every other option.
So it's a waiting game. This whole thing, it really puts a spotlight on the impossible choices that judges have to make.
It really does. Legal accountability, medical ethics, the rights of prisoners all tangled together, especially during a pandemic. There are no easy answers.
Not at all. It's easy to judge from the outside, but cases like this, they really make you think. If you were the judge, how would you weigh Sally's case? It's a question worth pondering, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. This has been The Deep Dive. We'll keep digging into the stories that make you think. Until next time. Welcome to another Deep Dive, everyone. Ready for a story? It involves a birthday party, a whole lot of missing cash, and a gunshot. Buckle up because things are about to get interesting.
Yeah, this one's got a few layers to it. We're talking assault charges, conflicting accounts, and even a petition for habeas corpus. That's where someone challenges the legality of their imprisonment, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're going behind the scenes of the legal system, folks. And our main source, the 2012 U.S. District Court opinion on Remy Smith's petition.
So we're looking at the case through the lens of Remy's attempt to overturn her conviction.
Exactly. We're going to put on our detective hats, analyze the court's take, and see if we can figure out what really went down. Think you're up for the challenge?
Let's do it. To set the scene, we're in the heart of Manhattan, Meatpacking District to be exact. It's July 13th, 2007, 4 a.m. A birthday party is winding down, and Remy Smith realizes a wad of cash, $3,000 to be precise, has vanished from her purse.
Oh, that sinking feeling, right. I can only imagine the tension in the air. So who enters the picture at this point?
Well, that's where Makeda Joseph comes in. Another partygoer. Remy believes Makeda might have something to do with the missing money. Their history. A little complicated even before this whole money situation.
Okay, so there's already some pre-existing tension between them, and then this missing cash just throws fuel on the fire.
Right. The connection is definitely there through that missing money.
So walk me through what happened next. I know things get a little murky here.
Absolutely. There's several different versions of the events. Makeda Joseph claims there was an altercation inside a car, a gun went off, and then Remy searched her purse before fleeing the scene.
Hold on, I'm trying to picture this. Who else was in the car? And did their stories match up with Makeda's?
Right. There were 3 other witnesses present at the party. Crystal Bolton, Ojidun Ojuwol, and Crystal Ricks. Their accounts don't perfectly align, which is where things start to get intriguing. There are inconsistencies that just raise eyebrows.
Like what? Give me an example. What doesn't add up?
We'll take Ojuwol. He initially claimed to be asleep during the incident. But, get this, later he changes his story after speaking with Makeda Joseph.
Whoa, talk about a plot twist. Changed his story after talking to the alleged victim. That's a huge red flag. Did the court find that suspicious?
Oh yeah, It definitely raises questions about the reliability of his testimony. They definitely noted that discrepancy. So we've got conflicting stories, a chaotic scene. It all leads to a trial, of course.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence did they present?
All right, let's head to the courtroom. I'm curious about the gun description. There was something about it being heavier. Fill me in on that.
Ah, yes. Interesting detail. Officer Paul McLaughlin, a crime scene reconstructionist, he basically pieces together how a crime might have happened, testified about the scene. Now, the gun itself never recovered, but Joseph described it as being heavier than the officer's .45 caliber pistol.
Okay, so no gun, just a description. Did she mean heavier in terms of weight or something else?
Good question. She clarified later that she meant visually heavier, not by actual weight, more like it was bulkier in appearance.
Ah, so a bigger gun, but still no actual weapon to examine. Talk about a missing piece of the puzzle. What else did they present at the trial?
Well, Remy's defense attorney tried to bring in a ballistics expert.
Okay, and a ballistics expert would have.
They could have testified about the possibility of the gun accidentally firing during a struggle. But the judge, sticking closely to the available evidence, restricted their argument. There wasn't enough concrete proof of a struggle over the gun.
Ah, so the judge was like, let's stick to the facts here. Makes sense. I wonder how often expert opinions are shut down like that.
It's a balancing act. Judges need to be sure that any expert testimony is relevant and based on solid evidence, not just speculation. I think in this case, the judge felt like there wasn't enough there to allow for a hypothetical struggle scenario without more concrete proof.
Gotcha. So no ballistics expert. What about Megiddo Joseph? Her testimony must have been crucial. Did the jury find her convincing?
Megiddo Joseph, yeah, definitely a key witness. She gave her account of what went down in the car. But during cross-examination, something pretty interesting came out. She had filed a lawsuit against Remy as a result of the shooting for $29 million.
$29 million. Wow. You have to wonder if that huge potential payout influenced her testimony at all. Did Remy's defense team bring that up?
Absolutely. They pointed out that Joseph was the only one who claimed that Remy had a gun, and they argued that her lawsuit might have biased her testimony, basically suggesting she had a financial motive to make Remy look guilty.
Yeah, that makes you think, like maybe her story wasn't as straightforward as it seemed on the surface.
Right. Lots of room for interpretation here. And that brings us to another big issue, the jury instructions. Now remember, the judge explains the law to the jury before they deliberate, right? So in this case, the judge told them that if they believed Joseph's testimony was truthful, her words alone were enough to satisfy that beyond a reasonable doubt standard for a guilty verdict.
Hold on, so just her words alone, wouldn't that make her testimony the be-all and end-all? Wouldn't that completely outweigh everything else?
You're hitting on a really crucial point. Both the Appellate Division and the Court of Appeals, those are higher courts, that review trial decisions, agreed that this instruction was a mistake. They acknowledged that it could have downplayed the need to prove every single element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, so they agreed the instruction was wrong, but what happened then? Did it affect the final verdict?
That's where it gets even more interesting. Despite saying the instruction was an error, both higher courts ultimately ruled that it was harmless when you considered everything else in the trial.
So they're basically saying it was a mistake, but not a big enough mistake to change the outcome. I can totally see why Remy would still challenge this. Seems like a big deal to have a flawed instruction, even if they say it didn't affect things in the end.
And that's exactly why Remy filed that habeas corpus petition. She's arguing that even if the higher courts called it harmless, that faulty instruction could have swayed the jury, and her conviction might be on shaky ground.
Okay, so we've got the scene, we've got conflicting stories, questions about witness credibility, and a controversial jury instruction. What exactly did Remy argue in her petition, and what was the district court's final decision? We've got a lot to unpack here.
Remy's petition, it brings up some really interesting points, like she argues that the gun might have actually belonged to Megiddo Joseph.
Okay, hold on. I'm trying to follow. We know the gun was never found, so how can she even suggest that? What's her logic there?
Well, she pointed out that none of the other witnesses, except for Joseph, ever said they saw Remy with a gun.
Right.
Remember that heavier description?
Right.
Remy's argument was that maybe, just maybe, the gun was already in the car, belonging to Joseph. And that whole heavier thing. Maybe it was based on a gun Joseph was already familiar with.
So she's turning the tables, saying the victim might have actually brought the weapon. That's a bold strategy. Anything else to back that up?
Yeah, she did. Remember the broken rearview mirror? The prosecution said that was from a struggle over Remy's purse, But Remy said, no, maybe it was broken during a fight for the gun.
Ah, I see. Tying it back to that whole ballistics expert thing. If there was a struggle for the gun, then an accidental firing becomes a lot more plausible.
Exactly. She's poking holes in the prosecution's story, introducing reasonable doubt by suggesting other possibilities that weren't really explored during the trial.
Makes sense. And then there's that $29 million lawsuit Joseph filed against Remy. That's a lot of money. How did Remy use that in her petition?
Oh, she definitely brought it up. She argued that a lawsuit that big could have totally skewed Joseph's testimony, like it gave her a big reason to paint Remy as the aggressor. Remy's team was basically saying, hey, Joseph had a financial incentive to make sure Remy got convicted.
Wow, so she's questioning the victim's motives, suggesting that maybe her story wasn't as objective as it seemed. Did the district court buy any of this?
They considered it, for sure.
Hmm.
But ultimately, they denied Remy's petition, their main reason. Not enough evidence to support the whole Joseph owned the gun thing.
So they didn't completely shut down her arguments, but they didn't think they were strong enough to overturn the conviction. What about that jury instruction issue? Did they address that?
Yeah, they did. The district court said, look, the higher courts already said it was a mistake. But, and this is important, they emphasized that you have to look at jury instructions as a whole, not just pick apart one sentence.
Okay, so big picture, not just focusing on one little thing. What did they decide?
They concluded that, yeah, there was a flaw, but the overall instructions were good enough. They said it didn't affect the fairness of the trial.
So it's like, they're saying, we see your point, but we don't think it fundamentally messed things up. I bet that was frustrating for Remy. She raises all these arguments, tries to show that her conviction wasn't solid, and the court basically says, nope, we're sticking with the original decision.
Yeah, it really shows you how hard it is to challenge a conviction, even when there are loose ends and inconsistencies. Like, it's not enough to just say, hey, maybe things happen differently. You have to bring some serious evidence to prove those other possibilities.
Right. It's about meeting that burden of proof. It makes you realize how much weight is given to the original verdict.
It is. The legal system is built on procedure and proving things beyond a reasonable doubt. It's tough, but that's how they try to make sure things are fair and the decisions aren't just random.
This whole case makes you think about the power of a single story, especially in a he said, she said situation.
For sure. It shows how one person's account can shape the whole narrative. And it reminds us that the legal system isn't just about cold, hard facts. It's about storytelling, about convincing a judge or jury that your version of events is the one they should believe.
We've heard Makeda Joseph's side, but we only get glimpses of Remy's perspective through her legal arguments, right?
That's true. We get caught up in the evidence and the legal back and forth, but this is about real people whose lives were changed forever by that night.
Yeah. We're missing a piece in the puzzle here, Remy's side of the story. What was going through her mind during all of this? The altercation, the trial, and even now as she tries to fight this conviction.
It's a side we don't often hear in the legal system.
Right.
It's all about evidence and procedure. It makes you realize that there are human stories behind every case, and those stories matter.
It's like that saying, there are three sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. And in this case, we've only really explored two of them.
Exactly. We've gotten deep into the legal arguments, the court's perspective, but we haven't really touched on Remy's own personal experience.
Right. Even in a system that tries to be impartial, you can't escape the human element. It's always there. So we've looked at the evidence, we've talked about the arguments, and we've seen how complicated this whole thing is. But even after all this, there's still a lot of ambiguity. Did Remy actually get a fair trial? Was justice served? It feels like we have more questions than answers.
And that, I think, is the nature of the legal system sometimes. It's supposed to resolve things, but sometimes there are no easy answers. There's that gray area, uncertainty, questions that linger even after a verdict is reached.
So what do we do with those questions? How do we make sense of a case like this when it's not clear-cut?
That's where the real value of doing a deep dive like this comes in. It's not about deciding whether Remy was guilty or innocent. It's about thinking critically, about recognizing how complicated the legal system can be, and about understanding that there can be different perspectives on truth and justice.
It's about encouraging people to think for themselves, to question what they're told, and to be open to the possibility that there might be more to the story than what they see at first glance.
Yes, it's about being curious, about digging deeper, about looking at these cases from different angles and forming your own opinions. That's what makes for a well-informed public.
It really is like we're trying to put together this puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing. We might never have the whole picture, but it's that process, right?
Yeah.
Looking at the evidence, thinking through the arguments, trying to see things from different sides. That's what matters.
Yes, exactly. This case really shows how important critical thinking is. Not just taking things at face value, but really engaging with the information you're given. It's a skill you need everywhere, not just in a courtroom.
Totally. Being an informed citizen, being able to look at information, to spot bias, to come to your own conclusions, whether you're reading news articles, listening to podcasts, even just talking with friends, that ability to think critically is crucial.
Absolutely. And I think this case shows just how human our justice system is.
Yeah.
Judges, lawyers, juries, they're all people. And they're not immune to biases or emotions. They can interpret information differently.
It's easy to forget that. We think of the law as this objective thing, but there's always that human element, which can be both good and bad, right?
Right. And that's why cases like Remy Smith's are so fascinating to look at. They remind us that the system, even though it's supposed to be fair, isn't perfect. There's always the possibility of mistakes, of things being interpreted in different ways. And it keeps us talking about what justice really means.
I think a big takeaway for anyone listening to this deep dive is be skeptical, not cynical, but, have that critical lens that we talked about.
I agree. It's about approaching things with a curious mind, asking questions, and remembering that there might be more to the story than meets the eye.
Exactly. Like in this case, we've got the court's opinion, we have what the witnesses said, we've heard the arguments from both sides, but we're still left wondering, what was it actually like to be Remy Smith that night? What was it like for her going through all of this?
Such important questions. And they bring us back to the fact that every legal battle is about real people. And those people's lives are deeply affected by what happens in the courtroom.
Yeah. It's so easy to get lost in the legal stuff, the procedures, the arguments. But at the heart of it all, it's about people, the choices they make, and that very human search for what's right, what's just. And even though we may never have all the answers, I think this deep dive has given us plenty to consider.
It definitely has. I think it's made us all a little more curious. It's challenged some of our assumptions. And hopefully it's encouraged everyone listening to keep thinking about the legal system and all the human stories that are a part of it.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the case of Remy Smith, we'll leave you with this thought. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep that critical thinking going. You never know what you might uncover.